Okay, cool. So hello everyone, and Doruk, it's great to be with you again.
Likewise,
And
Ethan.
likewise, yeah. And last time we were talking about creativity and creating from the unknown. And one of the topics that we ended on was like, okay, like what are just acknowledging that something's gonna get in the way. And that something is fear.
Yeah, as always.
And yeah, so we talked about maybe going into that and just sharing some personal stories, sharing some ways that we can, like, what to do when this fear comes up, because it will. And so we'd love for people to get some insight from this conversation to help them
Let's
with
do
that.
it.
Yeah. So is there anywhere that you would love to start, like when it comes to this topic?
Sure, I can take the first lead and see where it will
Yeah.
take us. Well, in my personal journey, I had to face my demons many, many times because I've gone through quite a lot of transitions. When I look through my history, I think the first biggest transition was really me leaving my hometown, Antalya, for graduate education. I moved to
Mhm.
Istanbul, first time living family too. It was a big milestone. Then again, living the country for the first time and directly leaving country to live in a different country and a new job as well. So every time when I had to do some major changes, it always triggered some sort of fear. And that uncertainty always brought quite a lot of things in me. Like, am I ready to make this move? Can I do
Yeah.
it? Can I do it alone? Do I have enough power in me to go through this process? Why am I even doing this? And all the questions and concerns, uncertainty, insecurities, and all the things that comes up. I personally feel like this is really a very natural human process for growth. Whenever you are expanding a part of yourself, we see this even in biology too. Like, you have this natural tendency to come back to your natural previous state. So of course, if
Mm.
you are really trying to extend the boundaries of yourself, your identity, what you're doing in the world, what you want to do in the world, that's going to come with some sort of stress in the system. So
Mm.
to me, like, living with fear while you are doing some transition is naturally a part of the process. And I didn't know that before. When I was doing my first changes, it was a lot more turbulent. I had really sometimes like physical symptoms in my body, lots of pain, and some maybe diseases coming up, popping up, and no one was able to discover the underlying reason. So everybody was saying that this is related to stress. And so, of course, I'm making big, bold moves in my life. Of course, it's going to create some stress. But this was really like 20 years ago when I was making these changes. I didn't really have quite a lot of stabilization tools in my life at the time. Now, when I'm
Mm.
making a change, I am making more conscious attention to that stabilization pillars in my life, like more self-care, more self-love, more meditation, more affirmations, giving me more confidence along the journey for the new direction that I would like to go. So knowing that there's going to be a turbulent journey, I am investing into more of the future me with
Mm.
reminding myself the future vision, the opportunities that this change will create in me. And that imagination, that dreamy part of me, is able to pull me out of the fear state most of the time. But it's not
Mm.
easy. And I developed a couple, maybe tips and tricks along the journey. They came in at the time intuitively, but knowing that this will be one of our discussions, I thought about those tools. Like, what did I do when I was
Mm.
going through dramatic changes in my life? And I realized a very clear pattern that worked personally for me. Not so sure whether it's going to work for everyone, but I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, amazing.
I think the ultimate trick personally for me is to switch from this fear mindset to a love state. Like we always said
Mm.
in the latest conversation too, the antidote to fear is really changing your state from this anxious mind to a more loving, curious, and experimental and playful child. And it's not an
Mm.
easy change, but it's a different operating model. What I did in my life is really, for example, in the last year of college, I was extremely busy getting ready for graduation. I had an part-time internship at the time, and I was applying for master program abroad. So my life was really like hectic, 3 or 4 different things juggling at the same time. I'm also working as a student,
Mm.
as a part-time student to support my living expenses and stuff like that. I literally have like 4 different things, and I was quite not certain what to do with my life. Like, should I stay? Should I go abroad? And I realized that I was paralyzed in this anxiety and questions in my mind that I didn't even have enough space and a healthy existence to make the right decisions. Somehow
Mm.
in me, something intuitively told me that stop there and insert some playfulness into your life. And that was the time out of nowhere I started experimenting with dancing.
Mm.
Before that, it was always like something that I did out of my own pleasure when a nice music was playing in the background, but I never thought about it as an opportunity to exercise my playfulness and to insert a little bit more love into my life. And that actually somehow in the last year changed my thinking pattern and opened a lot more space in my life where I can just relax, just go with the flow. Because I was, like I said, so busy, like all the time, maybe more than 15 hours in a day, I'm always in this mental space. And even just a couple hours of dancing really enabled
Mm.
me to shift my mind and go with the flow of life, sometimes surrender a little bit more to different opportunities that's in front of me. But I was so busy with my questioning and insecurities and mental patterns that I didn't really have enough space. So dancing in that very critical time of my life really helped me to loosen up a little bit and
Mm.
see different opportunities, which ultimately enabled me to create the life that I want retrospectively. And I faced a similar kind of pattern quite recently too, when I was still contemplating about making some significant changes in my life. Something in me invited me to write again. It was another hectic time in my life, like I'm juggling multiple things. So I don't have actually space and time to do those changes. But regardless, I received the invitation, like, what do you love? Writing, just write. So I started actually waking up 30 minutes earlier before I start the work, before I start my working day. And I started writing without knowing anything. Why am I writing? Just writing, putting things out there. And it's really helped me to release so many burdens in my mind, first of all. So I can release all of the questions and concerns and no one is going to read them. But it also enabled me to open up once again a space for that playful child to pour out of me in a more neutral context. Then years later, over the last few years, I discovered a very famous book by Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. And I
Mm. Yeah.
realized that this concept of morning pages is actually very well known among artists. And it's a very simple practice. I didn't know that I was doing it, but actually somehow intuitively I was called to do it. This is the first thing that you do in the morning. You just get a sheet of paper like A4 and you just write whatever comes to your mind without really criticizing, without really thinking about it. And
Mm.
personally, for me, the value was really getting rid of all of the questions and concerns in my life and giving my heart a space to breathe. And
Yeah.
these are like little small things, like every day, 30 minutes. Historically, it was like an hour, maybe every other day, just like dancing. And that's really created a loving muscle where I can finally welcome some more love into my life. And that really enabled me to have the internal trust, courage, flexibility, and flow with life so that I can go through some of the uncertainties that my mind was not ready to go through. So maybe my invitation here is really to change the operating model from fear to love. And in my case, this was really exercising some of the things that I loved as a child. And these were like dancing and writing. So I invited
Mm.
those 2 things into my life in little small steps. And those little small steps helped me to switch my operating model from fear to love. And talking about the switch, I actually love Einstein's quotes related to this topic. he says you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. So to me, it's really by focusing on what you love and inviting what you love into your life more, even in little small steps, like 15 minutes, 30 minutes. To me, it's really elevating our consciousness from this anxious mind to a higher level where we can see different opportunities with that openness that these activities creates within us. At least that has been my tip and trick so far, but I am eager to learn more from your experiences and enhance my tool set as well.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that, Dora. So it's like, I'm just reflecting on what you shared and like the themes behind what you shared. What you said about it's like almost like you're shifting into a different being, really. So you could imagine that there's a fear-based self in us, and that part is, if we think of it as a part, that part is trying its best to ensure that we survive, we don't get eaten.
Yes, that's important, or used to be important.
and it's like really, really dedicated to its job. So it won't stop. It'll be like, are you okay? Are you okay? Make sure you're okay, So it'll constantly do that. And then depending on your life experience, that fear-based part is going to use different tones or say different things. For some people, it might be like, hey, don't be lazy. Come on, go do stuff. No time to sit around, and it'll be like the same fears, in a sense, like the same universal fears of dying, of being alone, of being cast out and all that. But it'll be dressed up differently. Yours will be dressed differently than mine.
Sure.
And, mine is like, hey, you're worthless. Like, you're unwanted, you're invisible. Like, these are mine. And it's like, don't do that. But it won't say why don't do that. But if I kind of investigate, it's like, oh, don't do that because you're going to fall flat on your face. And then when you do, you're just going to prove that you're worthless, and that will really, really hurt. Like, so don't do that. Right. So that'll be that voice. And what you're talking about is to even offer the possibility that there's a different dimension to us. Is, I think, quite a new thing for many people to consider. Like, everybody knows, like, okay, sometimes I'm feeling fearful, sometimes I'm not. But I think most of us haven't considered that when we're fearful, we're actually we've actually collapsed into a smaller part of us. They just think sometimes I'm fearful, sometimes I'm not. I'm the same me. But like what you're saying is almost like, oh, but maybe that's not you. That's not all of you, right?
Exactly.
So you're just, it's like your consciousness has shrunk down into this fearful being. And then that fearful being is trying its best to do stuff. So then following on from what you're saying, like you've following your joy, following some guidance. So there's always like this seems to be a common theme from what I've seen. Everybody has some little voice in them, even when they're that fearful self. They're little like nudges. It's like the fire is always alive in there, and it's like, hey, Dora, just go off, go do that. It'll be like, hey, Ethan, just go for a walk.
Exactly.
or and we're like, no, I don't have time. Right? And so we will usually shut it down unless we have the awareness that there's some wisdom there, right? So I love what you're saying of, even if somebody just listens to this and gets a sense of, gives themselves 10% more permission to
Yes.
listen to that voice that wants to lighten the load or wants to have
Yes.
fun or something like that, that will lead to something different. That will lead to a little crack almost in the fearful being, just because, and I'm so fearful, I'm so fearful. Now I'm walking on the beach and it's like, you can't help but
Yes.
sort of,
Your body posture even changes when
yeah,
you go for that walk,
yes,
right? Before you were just like, I
yeah,
don't know. Like I have so many options and I'm just a failure in all of them. And you just go out and walk in nature, like 15 minutes of sunshine. You just like, okay, what's the
yeah,
worst?
and yeah, without realizing, it's like like a crumpled up piece of paper that it's wet and then it's crumpled up, and in the sunshine it dries and just opens up.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And I have this plant. Have you ever heard of this plant called the resurrection plant?
No, tell me more about it.
It's like one of those desert, like those cowboy movies. You see those old
Yes.
brambles blowing across and they roll around. And so we bought this thing online. And one of the names is resurrection plant. And it's like completely dried up. And it looks like a completely dead piece of like some sticks and stuff.
Yeah.
And you put it in water, and within 10 minutes, it's green and open. Like it's crazy. Yeah, so that's kind of what happens. And the water is love here. I believe is
Yes.
what you were pointing
Yes.
to.
Yes.
Um,
Whatever your inner
yeah,
child wants at that particular moment. That's love. Pour some love.
yeah,
Music. Some
yes,
dance. Some walking.
and yes, and I think it's important, at this point, just to say, I understand, and I think you understand that
Yeah.
the word love may be difficult for somebody to take in if they're like, oh my God, I've got a strategic report to compile, and I've got to do 50 slides, and they're like, what do you mean love? Like, what's love got to do with this, right? So when we, for me, when we say love, it's a shift in like, there's so many ways to think about it. It can be joy, it can be connection, it can be openness, any number of these things. But one of the doorways that I use is like, love. Love has the ability to be with you. Yeah. So imagine you're fearful and you go to somebody who loves you. They will be with you. They will open their arms. They'll hug you. They'll be with you. They won't run
Yes.
away. Right? If they do, then it's their fear that's doing that. But if, yeah, so with in love, they will be with you. So let's say we have this thing to do, and I've had that experience. Oh, I'm trying to prepare this thing, and oh, not enough time, and I feel this fear coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's an opportunity for me to be with my fear, to be with my experience. And, my body doesn't want to be with it. My mind doesn't want to be with it. It's trying to run away or trying to come up with a plan to fix something.
Mm-hmm.
But a doorway into love is just to actually sit there and feel what I'm feeling. It can be as simple as that. Sit down for 5 minutes and actually allow in what I'm feeling, like as if my daughter is afraid and just needs somebody to be with her, and I'll let her in.
Yes.
So that being with ourselves is quite often what the fear wants. It's like it's trying to ring a bell. It's like, hello, hello, attention.
Yes.
And we're like, okay, I'm gonna solve it. And then, we're trying to solve the thing because we'd rather do that than be with the fear.
So true. It just wants to be seen too. And yes, there are so many tips and tricks. A loving person, a trusted person in your life can hold that space, like loving space when you are going crazy, so that you can sit with it. You can share. So that's another very therapeutic thing. You
Yes.
just share your fears with someone else that you trust or your therapist, and it naturally heals because you are letting things out and someone's listening to you. You can do it with a therapist, you can do it with your loved ones, or you can do it with something you love, so that shifting your mindset from fear to a state of love can balance things out. And that doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean that you are escaping from fear too. I've experimented personally with so many different modalities. I think what I'm sharing right now is really a switch in state of being from a fearful, like controlled state and narrowed down state where you can just feel it. It doesn't feel good in your body. You just don't know how to escape it. That's the only
Yeah.
thing that you know.
Yes.
And the antidote to that, to me, the most effective one is really similar to that pressure. Invest into something that you love over the longer term. That love energy, drop by drop, will turn into a flow that's going to change your presence from your fearful self to a more flowing with life, more creative self, the one
Yes.
that's more brave, that's more courageous, that's really more fearless in terms of taking the necessary steps. That is my own graduation in my own journey too. Coming back to Einstein's quote, you cannot solve the problems with the same mind that created the problems. For a long time, being an analytical person and investing into my, let's say, more of the loving state, quite late stages in my life, because I was coming back to our previous conversations. No, I need to be serious in this world that I'm operating in. I
Yes.
lacked that muscle quite a long time. So when I faced the fear, I was also tackling it with my mind too. And there are some, I think, quite a lot of therapeutic models. Like I think most of the therapy is really dealing with these fears with the mind too. And there are actually quite a lot of things that I personally experimented. And I think you touched upon some of them, like sitting with the fear and analyzing and investigating the fear. There's a framework that I liked. It's very simple to remember, like RAIN, recognize. Oh, I am feeling some insecurity about this change. Recognize. Second, acceptance. Okay, I'm feeling it. I can feel insecurity too, because I've never done this before and I don't know whether I have enough courage and I have the right skills to do it. And it's a natural human thing to accept that I can also feel insecurity. Recognize, acceptance, investigate. Why am I feeling this? Where is this coming from? Oh, before, when I was a child, when I tried to do something different, I was ridiculed. And I had to prove myself that I can do it. So whenever I'm doing something new out of normal, I know that this can come up and this can take me to some previous experiences where I was not accepted. So some investigation, whatever that thing is. And that really gives you the power of the mind to go deep. I think the power of the mind is really analytical thinking. So what are my belief systems that's really triggering this feeling? And the last point is RAIN and non-judgmental point of view, like stepping back and looking into what you're experiencing and acknowledging that these kind of feelings come and go. It's a natural part of being human that doesn't necessarily define me. And I've gone through these experiences many, many times in my life. Whenever you make any transition, and I'm sure, regardless of your age, you have done some transition. You moved, you change jobs, you change friends, and you change relationships, like any kind of change always triggers something. Like the name of the monster might be different. For you, it might be worry. For me, it might be insecurity. For someone else, it might be losing power, like whatever that monster thing is. But I think it's all the same. And we can also look at this in a more scientific manner, like in a structured way, like you said, acceptance, recognition, acceptance, investigation of our own belief systems, what is triggering this, and from a non-judgmental point of view, acknowledging that these things can happen, allowing that to exist in a more open state through some therapy, through some loved ones, or through building our love muscle on the side so that we can hold that while we are making the transition. So personally, for me, it is easier to solve the problem in a fundamental level by hopefully changing my existence from a fear to a love state. I found that one easier. But it's not, of course, one thing that works for all. If someone really would like to do a little bit more scientific research, style analysis into where this fear is coming from, I personally experimented with that pattern too. And in that, writing really helps. So I always ask these questions. Okay, I have this actually framework that I sometimes share with my own networks and with the people who would like to work with me too. I said, let's have a coffee chat. It's like 15 minutes. In that 15 minutes, I go through this process. Dear fear, welcome. I see you. You're there. Now I am feeling it here or there, or maybe there. I know that you're there. And I know that you're trying to give me some messages, some signals. And it's really important to give that space for that fear to reveal what it's supposed to reveal too. Coming back to your point, historically, it was a safety issue. It was real life and death. It was real our physical safety. Nowadays, I think most of our fears are not primarily related to physical safety. Maybe there's some financial elements in it. So we might have to think about, oh, is this a financial concern that might really maybe hinder my capacity to grab food or to provide for my family? So there might still be some safety issues. But for most of us, it's an emotional safety issue. And also it's an intellectual, some belief system safety issue. So when I'm unpacking in these tea conversations with the fear, I'm trying to go deeper. Is this a physical threat? Is this an emotional threat? Is this a belief system threat? And can I compensate it in different ways? Come up with different strategies for that physical, let's say, stability that I need. Can I, for example, move into a cheaper location if I'm going to make a transition in my life and I'm concerned about financial safety? Can I take that move? Emotional hit. I'm going to share myself fully with the world. And what if the world doesn't accept me? Can I build my own loving community in this transition? Who will be there regardless of the outcome? Can I surround myself with my loved ones more? Can I consciously invest into the things that I know will bring some emotional stability into my life, that I can go through this turbulent time without really investing so much into external validation? And the third pillar is really belief systems. What are the belief systems that's really telling me that I can be a failure? But if I fail, what's wrong with failure? What happened when I failed historically? So what are the belief systems that I carry in me that's triggering this insecurity in me? So I also have this type of mini tea or coffee conversations when I go deeper using my mind. So I think the best strategy might be really using both of the qualities that we have as human beings, to the extent that you can use your mind to dig deeper into really understanding what is triggering that fear, because I think sometimes fear is really a quite nice signal to fill in the gaps in the process too. Sometimes all fear is telling you is that you don't know enough, because when we don't know something, we fear. So it's a signal for you to learn more about it. You can just do more research, talk to the people who have gone through the same kind of process, or you can just do little small mini experiments that's going to make you feel what it means to make that change. I also call these things as minimum lovable experiments. I run little small experiments in my life when I would like to do a change, and I don't know whether I will like it or not. Sometimes talking to other people is nice, but again, talking to other people is also one perspective from an external person's point of view and experience. I can rely on that, but maybe I'm not going to love that experience. So my personal thing is setting up some clear objectives, like 1 month, 2 months, I'm going to try this. And out of that, I'm going to look into what this experience brings to me. And then that's really a nice way of testing things out with yourself. And that also eliminates fear. You're afraid because you don't know whether you will like this thing or not, for example. Let's say that you are going to make a dramatic change. And then you can really have a conversation with your fear, try to understand where it's coming from. If it's financial, if it's safety related, try to find alternative, creative ways of maybe securing yourself in other ways. Emotional security, finding additional supportive systems that's going to make you emotionally stable enough to go through the turbulent times, and challenging belief systems. and hopefully reviving them and enabling new things to happen. And sometimes just trying things out to see whether you like them or not, so that you answer what the fear is asking you to do. So to me, it's also a sweet balance of using your mind that created the problems, but using it in a way that's more open, explorative, curious, like, okay, let's have a conversation. What are you trying to tell me? But
Yes.
for this conversation to happen, you need to open that space. And personally, the fine trick is really, at least it was easier for me to make that transition for this discussion to happen when I was able to shift my mind to something that I love. So let's say after dancing, I'm more open because I've been like flowing with life, or just
Yeah.
literally writing something like poetry. It opens me. I like it. And it takes out of my mind from this craziest decision that I'm going to do with my life. And in that open space, like 30 minutes, then I can have this conversation with myself. Okay, fear, let's have a coffee with you now. Now that I'm open, now that I release some of my muscles through dancing, now I'm happy to listen to you. Again, this is a personal tip and trick. We are all different, but at least what I found insight was really loosening that mind with some self-love first, and then inviting the mind to sit with the fear and allowing the mind to help us to maybe ask the right questions so that we can unpack some of the underlying belief systems, some of the underlying challenges that triggers that fear too.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you shared. So like the metaphor from going from fear to love, another way of looking at it, to go from closed to open. And so from that perspective, what you were sharing was like, what are the different ways that you can help yourself to open, and that might, it's like a multi-dimensional, like Jenga. One of the metaphors I like is Jenga. You pull out one out from here, you pull one out from there, and you're looking for something that can cause a shift. Well, it's the opposite in Jenga. You're trying not to, but in this case, you're pulling something out, and what you really want is for this really rigidly held fear to collapse in some way. And it can, and it can, depending on, like, you just have to try different things, and then at some point it collapses. And sometimes the thing is you just go to sleep and then it collapses overnight by itself.
That's what, exactly.
But other ways, when we develop these tools for ourselves, we will try these different things. So I'll know certain things that work for me, like being with the fear, or looking at, like, what does my heart desire? What would I love? And when I look at that, it's on a different dimension than the fear, because the fear is about me surviving. And what would I love is really about something greater than me. It might be like, wanting to create something with my family. It might be my relationship with my kids. It might be supporting others in my work. It might be sort of like changing the world. That kind of stuff can all come out when I'm connected to my heart. And then it's like a different view completely. Yeah. And so that can loosen the fear somewhat. So coming back to what I was saying, that I might have these different, I'm aware of these different ways that I can open my perspective. And then I might get stuck, all right? So each of us might get stuck because we've learned certain things, but our fear is very smart as well. Like, yeah, it will realize, I might be getting dissolved here. And then and then it'll come up with new thoughts and new ways of being heard. So everybody will have the experience of some old fear coming up again and again and again in different ways and different contexts. It's like, oh, this is my high school fear. I'm still having it in the now that I'm a CEO, right? And so that's when it's helpful to have this, like what you said, to have another perspective or somebody else to help you create a new space, because that other person, whether it's a therapist, a coach, or just a mentor, or even a friend who can just drop their agendas and just be with you, will introduce a new perspective. And that can be really powerful. So it, they will take out some blocks that you couldn't take out. And then it's like, oh, I didn't even know this Jenga had the other side there. Like, oh, that's interesting. And then, yeah, so that's talking to someone, being with someone. Just even like if we were having a coaching conversation and I just sat there and didn't say a word and you just talked, it would be different than if you talked to yourself. Because just in the space of being with somebody else, something happens. Like there's you're connected to another person's presence. So you're connected to another person's being, and that shifts something in you. And so I've seen this happen many times, right? And when I'm not even saying anything, but somebody talks and they're like, oh gosh, yeah, they start to see things that they could never see. So that's really powerful.
Yeah. I think unless one has really self-reflective regular practices, in this case, mine is really writing. I write daily. It's really a way for me to really connect to my mind, like give my mind a space to pour its all of your concerns. And it's a way for me to also create things out of me. So it's an introspective process. It's like my mirror where I put things in my life and see what it reflects. I call it, in that sense, self-coaching or self-therapy. But again, this is a personal style that I adapted quite a long time in my life. But unless you have a self-reflective process like this one, like regular journaling, that's going to give you a mirror reflection of who you are, what you do in your life, and what your vulnerabilities might be. Because if you can just go through the process and read through what you wrote, you can clearly identify some patterns. I think that's the only way as an individual that you can literally put your third person hat and then look through your life as if it's like a movie. Beyond that, I think the most critical thing is really, one, you are in a vulnerable spot that you know you're not your best self. Like you are dealing with all these fears, concerns, and all of the negative emotions. Having someone support and having that space held for you is really such an important thing for a healing process. You can do it yourself with different self-therapeutic modalities, but it's also important to consider alternative options, like you said, in the presence of a teacher, in the presence of a coach, in the presence of a therapist. You can just let things out, and through the mirror of the reflections in these conversations too, you can see different things that you didn't realize before. And I think in your conversation, you were also highlighting something very important, saying that some of the fears that you thought were coming from your childhood can happen at later stages in your life too. And I think it's really important to highlight this, because I think healing process is cyclical. We all have some common wounds that's really coming from our own biology, our own culture, families, training, and our historical experiences in the world. And we can work on them. We can identify what those things are. And from a distance, they can maybe get better, but maybe 5 or 10 years later, it emerges out of space again. And the first reaction that naturally we do as human beings is really, oh, I thought that I resolved this, or I had many therapy sessions about this. Like, why is this once again coming up? And the first thing that we create is once again a constriction, like a limitation, like a judgment to our own feelings. And I've done this many, many times in my life. I've worked on this. Like I thought that I resolved this. Like, why is this once again coming up? And I realized that if something is coming up once again, there's a more subtle level. It's not the same fear. It's more subtle. And it's more like I can dig deeper and I can maybe take one more step for the longer term resolution of it. So it's important to acknowledge that healing is not linear, like our minds expect it to be, like tick in the box, like it's a gradual process. I'm going to identify all the fears and I'm just going to tackle all of them and they're just going to disappear from my life for good. Not really. Not really. It's quite cyclical. It can come up once again whenever you need it the most. And probably it's going to be once again painful. But the more that we approach it with, again, openness, with a curious mind, if we're really looking at it from a mind perspective, okay, welcome, dear old friend. I thought that you're gone for years, but welcome back. This time, what are you trying to tell me? And in my own life experiences, when I had this open conversation, I realized that what was triggering most of this conversation was really my old belief systems. Like 20-year-old Doruk had a belief system that at the time was working for her life standards. But in 30 years old, she has a different life and she has different aspirations. And the old operating model, the beliefs, are not holding at that stage. And if I'm living my old belief system in the old life, but my new version is asking me to do more bolder things in life, but my operating model doesn't allow it, the same fear can come in. And with the fear, if I sit down, I understand, oh, I used to have this belief system before. It used to work when that version of me was alive, but now I am more mature, I have more capabilities, and I don't have to hold to this old belief system. But every time the same fear is coming up and asking me to have this conversation, for me to unpack with a curious mind, what are the underlying belief systems that's really triggering this emotion in me too? And every time I'm discovering something new. So if we can approach this not in a judgmental way, like, oh, is this coming up again? Instead, okay, my dear friend, welcome back. Let's have a tea. Let's have a coffee. This time, what are you trying to tell me? There is always some wisdom in it. And unless I think we take this pause to have these challenging conversations, either with ourselves through a paper or through a coach, through a therapist, through different healing modalities or teacher, whatever your personal choice is, it's not going to go away till you face it. You can just close one relationship. Oh, I'm facing this with my girlfriend or boyfriend, so I'm just gonna change that person in my life. It's gonna come up in your work. You'll have the same dilemma with your coworkers, with your boss. You will have the same dilemma with your parents. So till you face whatever emotion you're escaping from, it's going to show up in all of your relationships, because it's a vibration that you're attracting and it's asking you to sit with it, to first accept it, then understand it, investigate it, and hopefully resolve it for good. But for that to happen, you need to take that challenge of pausing and sitting with the feeling and asking its curious questions to reveal its secrets with you.
Yeah, you know what, Doruk, like this, maybe this conversation can invite whoever's listening to just have a shift in how they relate to fear, how they perceive fear. Because if you're like most people, it's like fear is this bad thing that we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to control our lives so that we don't feel it, or we try to distract ourselves from it. So it's like something has gone wrong here. So I'm not allowed to have that. Usually, from what I've seen in the business world, leaders, control is the primary kind of thing. It's like, oh, I'm feeling this fear. Okay, let's put into place more controls, more procedures. let's make sure that, we think our way through.
I see everything and I can control everything this way. I'm just going to feel more secure.
That's right. And then they still have this underlying tension the whole time. And what I think what we're pointing to here is just consider a different possibility.
Exactly.
Right? What if you didn't have to live life with this tension there all the time? And like we see that in all the stats of how people are feeling at work. It's this tension, and that energy of tension is trying to hold something down, or trying to hold something together, and just having to maintain that day after day. So what if we saw that, hey, what's coming up here is not something to be pushed away or controlled? Like, you will never control your way out of it. What if instead, like you said, it's kind of like a natural way for life to say, hello, there's something for you to maybe look at here. And if you can look at this and listen to this and honor this, there's something that's you really want on the other side of this. And one example is when you can just somehow ease the control, you start to taste the freedom on the other side of it. The freedom and peace, which is what you really want. And you think you're going to get there by controlling everything. If I can control everything, then I'll be free and I'll be peaceful. But it doesn't work like that.
Beautiful invitation. Couldn't said it better.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to reframe fear as a friend, to listen its invitation and give it enough space for it to exist in a loving context, but also investing into love so that our hearts have enough courage to take fear along the journey too. I actually liked, I can't remember where I heard this analogy, but an artist was talking about overcoming fears in her writing workshop. And she was describing how her relationship with the fear changed over time. And she said that, you're going on a journey and there is always fear as your friend along the journey. She is sitting there. What has changed in her life through experiences that she knows that the fear will be coming along the journey, but fear is not going to lead the journey. She says, okay, dear fear, you're coming with me. You're just sitting there in the back and you're not going to lead the way. I know that you're going to walk with me, but I am the captain of this car and we are going in this direction and you are with me. I see you. I allow you to be there, but that's your role. I will listen if you see something. I consider that you are taking this journey with me too, but I am taking the lead with love, with courage, with this bravery, and this is the direction that we're going. So I think it's also important to have that balance. Let's not neglect that fear will be there, and let's take the invitation of fear so that we listen, we take fear with us along the journey, but let's also remember that what is calling that change in us is more powerful than the fear. And I think we can take that step forward if we can allow ourselves to do more of what we love, so that that muscle of trusting ourselves and trusting life can allow us to have a little bit more breathing space for the fear to disappear and to loosen up a little bit too.
Yeah. So
the fear is there in the back seat coming with me.
yeah, and in fact, it's like, and I know we're gonna finish up here, but as a closing thought for me, it's like, we are, each of us has this unstoppable love of growing, expanding as who we are. If we stop, we feel frustrated. If we stop and don't grow, and so it's just a human yearning. Like, we want to experience, and this is the thing. It's not just that if I got silver, I got to get gold. If I got 100, I have to have 150. It's not just that. It's like we want to experience ourselves
Yes.
being that, because
Yes.
somewhere in there we can see that it's possible. We
Yes.
kind of know that there is a greater way, there's a greater me available.
Yes.
So that is always there, and it's like calling us forward. And that and fear are the two sides of the same thing. It is through that expansion that we are meeting these new fears,
Yes.
and we meet ourselves on the other side of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I can almost say that it's never boring. It's never boring. You always discover something new. And when you sit with it, it always turns out to be the betterment for all. It might be painful while you are going through it, but you turn out to be a better person at the end of the journey. And I've done many, many changes in my life. And when I looked through, it was always painful. It was always inviting me to grow, to become a different version of me. And the process was always turbulent. But in the end, what I achieved, who I turned out to be at the end of the process, was always worth it. And I always remind myself that as well. So when I am making another change, I say, you have done this before. And you know that initial stages will be always turbulent. Trust the invitation that you received. If you were not ready, you wouldn't receive the invitation. So I think that's also a very important reminder too. You wouldn't have that intuition inviting you to play, to experiment that, to do something different if you are not ready to take that challenge. And if you are ready to take that challenge, there is naturally going to be some fear, which you can hopefully take along the journey with you too, in the backseat. But ultimately, I think you need to trust yourself. If you receive the invitation, it's the right time for you to take the journey. And yes, it might be bumpy along the road, but I think it's always beautiful in the end. And that's going to be my last words.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, I would love for you who's listening, if that you're listening to this, to really take what Derek said there and actually use that as an invitation. Like, have 3 minutes after this and just consider, what invitation am I receiving? Give some space to whatever fear there may be, and it may take the form of tension or stress or whatever it is. But if you feel it there, give it the space that maybe you haven't given it, and just consider that if this is an invitation, what might it be? All right, Derek. Pleasure as always.
Likewise, as always.
So I'm going to pause the recording here, and also for anybody listening, we would love any comments, questions, suggestions for future explorations. Feel free to either post a comment, a message, either of us. Yeah, we would love to be able to help shift something in some way for you that makes a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.